Good afternoon. Still sunny and warm here in this part of British Columbia, anyway. And they tell us that summer is going to last a few extra weeks, and then we'll have a mild winter, which is rather nice. Sometimes when I read a newspaper article, and particularly if I pursue it a little, it gives me a lot of joy, some of these things that take place. One of the most tragic of all the Western heresies is the idea that mankind is totally depraved, that people are born completely sinful. Now, the teaching of Augustine of Hippo, the father of almost all Western heresies, that people inherit the guilt of original sin. And when I think about the innate goodness of humanity, how often this positive aspect, this authentic goodness comes through, how mankind is really truly an image and likeness of God, and that's implanted in us even when it's become quite darkened. It still shines through in most people from time to time. I'm reading about an 11-year-old boy who's not sure, they don't mention what his illness is. It's something he's born with, anyway, something genetic. And he's unable to communicate well. He can't keep his eyes still. It's very difficult for him to focus and keep his eyes fixed on another person when he's talking to them. And there's so many things that he actually can't understand. Genuinely doesn't have the capacity to understand. He goes to school anyway and struggles through with it. And very often when he's asked, so one other kid might ask him, but if he'd like to play, and he can't really put that picture together. What does that actually mean? What would we be doing if we did that? So he usually was standing for a long time all by himself, as I say, by the mesh wire fence, or what we call a hurricane fence, around the schoolyard, and with his fingers locked in the mesh, staring off into space, all alone. Well, it happens that some of the kids, I think were perhaps encouraged by someone, decided to see if they couldn't do something to help him, to make his life a little better, to include him a bit. Well, they were asked, I guess they were asked for volunteers who would go and spend this time with him. Maybe thinking one or two might do that. Out of a class of 60, 43 volunteered. And what followed is so, I think, profoundly inspiring. These kids all got together and they formed, the kid's name started with a G, they formed Club G, built around him and his special needs. They restructured hide-and-seek games, for example, where the person who was it would be wearing a very bright sign or sticker of some kind, so it's very easy to identify, because this kid wouldn't be able to identify him otherwise. So he could play too. They restructured the kickball game so it covered much less territory because the kid couldn't cope with the larger space. So they restructured the whole game around this kid and how it would be possible for him to play. They did this with a number of other games as well. They've been doing this for a year now, sticking right with it and rather enjoying doing it. They even create special Club G jokes based on what this kid could understand and find humorous. Now the other kids have been impressed by his courage and persistence himself. But one has to be impressed by their courage and persistence and by the great compassion that these kids have. This is empathy. This is an example. Now, some of these kids may not even be believers. They may grow up in an atheist family or whatever. But whatever the case, they've mastered empathy. They've learned what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. They have genuine empathy. There's an innate goodness and compassion within these kids. And by the way, it's grown beyond 43 now. There are quite a number of other kids who like participating too. And the empathy that they show, the way they go out of their way to include this kid, and the way they feel joy in having done it. It's not pity. You see, this is beyond pity. This is something greater. This is something where these kids, around 11, 12 years old, are going out of their way for this one child who has this disability, a collection of disabilities. And they're feeling great joy in doing it. And it strengthened their friendship amongst themselves and strengthened them as a group around this Club G. It's really become a profound experience of friendship for all of them. And they're fulfilling the law of Jesus Christ by having done this. And their motivation likely wouldn't have been Christianity. It doesn't necessarily motivate people to do things like this. But it is nevertheless the mark of the indwelling presence of the living God in whose image and likeness they are, that still manages to shine through in all of humanity. And it's a testimony that mankind is not totally depraved, that mankind is not completely evil or born completely sinful, that mankind does have a will to the good, and that mankind is essentially good. We need to have this faith, and particularly to have this faith in this younger generation where time and time and time again I become so joyous and so impressed by how much goodness comes through in these young people, in these children, how much compassion, how they have this great capacity to refuse the prejudices and the malice of our generation and come out as better human beings than our generation actually was. And I see it on such a scale that the bad things that happen can't possibly be the things that impresses one the most. What impresses one the most is that kids can do really bad things, but such a huge number of them do really good things, really compassionate and loving things. This is what has to impress one the most. And it certainly impresses me. I think this younger generation are just marvelous. And every time I see something like this, it reinforces that belief. Like the young people who show up here to help resuscitate this spring, this river, small river at the end of the monastery property. We have to stop preaching darkness and negativity about everything and find the good, the bright, and the joyous, so that we can then take that as a basis upon which to discuss the fact that all mankind is created by God and created in his own image and likeness, and that Satan cannot overpower that light that shines on in the darkness within people, that mankind is essentially good, and that Western Christianity has got to really reshape itself and learn to come to grips with reality and with the truth about humanity and with the truth about so many things having to do with the human condition, and come out of their darkness and our Orthodox Christian people who have sort of absorbed some of this, the semi-converts who are now priests in the Orthodox Church, to come out of all of this kind of heaviness and darkness and see this glorious beauty of compassion, love, and essential goodness in mankind, and especially in the younger generation. Thank you all, and I hope to see more and more things like this. This young man who's become the focal point for what is best in children, for what is best in a younger generation, for what is best in humanity.